It's spring, and a farmer stands at the edge of his field with a problem. The ground is bare and ready. In a few weeks, it needs to be full of barley. And barley means seed. And seed means silver he doesn't have. Not until the harvest he hasn't grown yet. He's short by the width of one season, the oldest problem in farming. You need money now to make money later, and now is exactly when you have none. So he walks into the city, past the market, past the houses, and up to the largest building any of them have ever seen. Thick walls, guarded doors, storerooms packed with grain and metal. And inside, the men who can solve his problem, not soldiers, not nobles, priests. He has come to borrow money from a temple. And the strange thing, the thing worth the next 10 minutes, is that this was completely normal. Because 4,000 years ago in the mud brick cities of Mesopotamia, the temple was the bank. Not like a bank. Actually one, with deposits, loans, interest, and written contracts 1,000 years before anyone struck the first coin. So let's walk in with him and see how a bank worked before money had a face. Why a temple, though? Of all the places to keep the wealth of a city, why the house of a god? Because it was the safest building there was on every level at once. Physically, it was the biggest and best-built structure for miles. Thick walls, solid doors, people around it day and night. Socially, it was protected by something stronger than any wall. Nobody wanted to be the person who robbed a god. Stealing from a neighbor was a crime. Stealing from the temple was a crime and a sin, with the god himself as the injured party. That combination made the temple the one place in the city where you could leave something valuable and reasonably expect it to still be there. So people did. If you had gold, silver, grain, or anything worth protecting, you could hand it to the temple and know it would be guarded. The earliest version of putting your money somewhere safe instead of burying it in your floor and hoping. Your wealth sat in the god's storeroom, counted and recorded until you came back for it. It wasn't only merchants and the rich who used it either. A widow with a little silver and no man to guard it, a family storing the season's surplus, a trader parking his profit before the next journey. The temple held wealth for people who had no safe of their own, which, in a world of mud brick houses and no locks, was almost everyone. And the temple had plenty of its own on top of what it held for others, because for generations it had been collecting. Offerings from worshippers, donations from the rich, a share of every harvest, taxes funneled through it. Century after century of grain and silver flowing in, and very little flowing back out. A temple that had stood for 200 years had been filling its storerooms for 200 years, which left the priests sitting on a mountain of grain and silver. And a mountain of idle wealth is a temptation in any era. Why let it sit in a storeroom when the farmer at the door needs seed, and will happily pay you back more than he borrowed? So the temple started to lend. And this is the moment a storeroom becomes a bank. One thing to picture before we go on, there were no coins. Not yet. Coins are 1,000 years in the future from here. So silver didn't mean a purse of neat discs. It meant silver by weight. Lumps, rings, scraps, cut and weighed on a scale for every transaction. A loan of silver was a loan of a measured weight of metal, checked on a balance when it went out and again when it came back. Money existed. It just hadn't been minted into money yet. The farmer gets his silver or his seed grain on one condition: he pays back more than he took. That extra is interest, and it existed 4,000 years ago, exactly like it does now. Borrow grain, and at harvest you return the grain plus a share on top. Borrow silver, and you repay the silver plus its share. We even have the receipts. Literally. One clay tablet from around 1800 BC records a woman named Amuritum receiving a loan of silver at a stated rate of interest to be paid back by the third month. Her name, the lender's name, the amount, the rate, the due date, a loan document you would recognize instantly today, pressed into clay before your civilization had a word for most of the things on it. And we know the going rates because in Babylon they did something remarkable. They wrote the rates into the law. The most famous law code of the age fixes them precisely. A third on grain, roughly a fifth on silver, 33% and 20%. Those numbers were treated as the legal ceiling, and they stayed roughly fixed across Mesopotamia for more than 1,000 years, a stability any modern economy would envy. Now, the loan itself. How do you enforce a debt in a world with no computers, no courts on every corner, no credit score? You write it down. Every loan was pressed into a clay tablet. Who borrowed, from whom, how much, at what rate, due, when. The tablet was the contract, and often it was witnessed, signed off by named people who could later swear it was real. But there's one witness on these tablets that stops you cold. Frequently, the god was listed as one. Think about what that does. The loan isn't just a deal between two men. It's sworn in the house of a god, with the god himself on the tablet as a party to it. Break the contract and you haven't just cheated a lender. You've broken an oath in front of a deity who is standing right there in the room, in the form of his temple. It's collateral you can't repossess and can't escape. Your own fear of heaven pressed into the clay next to the interest rate. And it cut both ways. A lender who cheated on a temple loan wasn't just a swindler either. He'd sworn the same oath, in front of the same god. And the god did not take sides between rich and poor. So far, this sounds like a machine for grinding a poor farmer into debt. It wasn't quite, because the law also protected the borrower against the one thing he couldn't control. Farming is a gamble with the weather. You borrow in spring betting on a harvest, and then a storm flattens the field, or the river runs low, or the rain simply never comes. Now you owe grain you were never able to grow. In most of history, that's the trapdoor into debt slavery. The Babylonian law wrote in a rescue. If a storm ruined your crop, or the harvest failed, or there was no water that year, then, for that year, you owed no interest. The exact wording is almost gentle. You wash your debt tablet in water and pay nothing for that year. The debt didn't vanish, but the clock stopped. A bad harvest wasn't your fault, so the law refused to let it bury you. A crop failure clause, debt relief for an act of God, written into loan law 37 centuries ago. And this system worked so well that it outgrew the temple. Over the centuries that followed, and now we're moving forward in time, well past our farmer, past the Bronze Age itself, into the Age of Iron and empires. Private families got into the business. The most famous is a Babylonian house called Egibi, whose records survive in a staggering archive. Around 1,700 clay tablets spanning 5 generations of the same family. They lent, they took deposits, they managed land, and financed trade. A family bank, run like a business, passed from father to son for over a century. But, and this matters, Egibi came more than 1,000 years after the farmer we started with. They're the great-great-great-grandchildren of the idea. The machinery they ran for profit was invented much earlier in the storerooms of Bronze Age temples by priests who were sitting on too much grain. They had the thing itself then, if not the word for it. A place that held your wealth and kept it safe. A place that lent to people who needed it and charged interest for the service. Written contracts, enforced by law and by God. Regulated interest rates, even protection for the borrower when the harvest failed. Everything we think of as banking was already there. It just didn't look like a bank. It looked like a temple, the biggest building in the city, full of grain and silver with a god standing witness over every deal. The first banker in recorded history wasn't in a suit. He was a priest, and the first vault was the house of a god.